On Thursday, December 10th, our president treated the world to his much anticipated speech as he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo, Norway. The reviews are in, and the praise is largely bipartisan. Newt Gingrich remarked that the speech was historic. Kathleen Parker of the Washington Post rates it as a triumphant expression of American values and character, and that it is his most presidential, marking the moment when Obama became a leader. I expected that from the left, no matter what he had to say there. But has the right been hypnotized by this president? Let's look more closely at the speech. Let's look between the lines. I believe that a more critical review might conclude that even as he eloquently praised America's role in history, wrapping himself in the flag, he simultaneously steps on any part of our nation's recent history that he finds objectionable or that he didn't play a role in. And Ms. Parker, I await your recommendation for a therapist and an asylum. Thank you. We start with the act for which he has received high praise. In fact, he told us that he had come to Oslo with great humility. Noting the controversy surrounding his receipt of the award, he tells us, in essence, to be patient, that he'll earn it eventually. And I quote, "This is because I'm at the beginning and not the end of my labors on the world stage." See? Just give him time. He's only had a year. Continuing, he says, compared to some of the giants of history who have received this prize, Schweitzer and King, Marshall and Mandela, my accomplishments are slight. So he tells us that compared to giants, he might not stack up. But compared to mere mortals, well, I suppose we're left to assume that he is just too humble to make that comparison. Then he takes us from his place in history to his place on the world stage in the here and now. Let's hear what he has to say about the two wars we're fighting today. He tells us one of these wars is winding down. The other is a conflict that America did not seek, one in which we are joined by 42 other countries, including Norway, in an effort to defend ourselves and all nations from further attacks. So, could he be saying that Bush's war is bad and the Obama war is good? I think so. But none of the commentators noticed this. All the reviews tell us that he was being, quote, an American committed to his nation's values and, quote, the unapologetic President of the United States. Again, from Kathleen Parker. I think he's standing up for himself, not his country. I recall that we had a similar, impressive roster of allies in the Iraq War led by George Bush. I think we had everyone essentially except France and Germany, two countries with a serious conflict of interest with regard to the Saddam regime. Later, the president tells us that he arrived in Oslo, quote, filled with difficult questions about the relationship between war and peace. Sounds like waffling to me. Sounds like he wants to have it both ways when it comes to war and peace. Unfortunately, the soldiers he referenced in the sentence right before that one don't have the option of waffling. They follow orders. And those orders should be given by a commander-in-chief who doesn't display so proudly his ambiguity and equivocations regarding their mission. I'm sure some of them, maybe a few members of the CIA, or the Special Forces, or the Navy SEALs, want to remind the President of the words of Jack Nicholson's character in A Few Good Men. I have neither the time nor the inclination to explain myself to a man who rises and sleeps under the blanket of the very freedom that I provide, and then questions the manner in which I provide it. I would rather you just said thank you and went on your way. Though he was taken off in cuffs at the end of that movie, I think Colonel Jessup had a point, don't you? Next, the President takes us to history class. He tells us, quote, war in one form or another appeared with the first man. Now there's a daring statement that must have upset some of the President's progressive allies. I mean, is President Obama an evolution denialist? And now we come to a portion of the speech that I think could be a central part of the President's war philosophy. He acknowledges that there is such a thing as a just war, suggesting that he agrees with the historical convention that war is just when quote, certain conditions are met, if it is waged as a last resort or in self-defense, if the force used is proportional, and if whenever possible civilians are spared from violence. End quote. Generally reasonable points, but I know America has never conducted war otherwise. However, regarding the rule about proportionality, gradual escalations, think Vietnam, were disastrous. I think the level of force we should deploy in any war should be the level that it takes to win. Now we're reminded of the Cold War, as the President notes, quote, the world may no longer shudder at the prospect of war between two superpowers. Interesting that the President lets pass the chance to draw any distinction between the two superpowers. Let's pass the opportunity to note that one of the two was triumphant in the Cold War. Then we're treated to a second moment of humility. Quote, I do not bring with me today a definitive solution to the problems of war. Many viewers were surely disappointed at that moment, as they must have had much higher hopes. But their hope was brought back to life with this profundity. Quote, it will require us to think in new ways about the notions of just war and the imperatives of a just peace. New ways of thinking. Yeah, that's it. That's the answer. But as it turns out, he tells us, quote, we will not eradicate violent conflict in our times. Again, the disappointment. But really, how trite can this man be? And then we return to history with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King. Violence never brings permanent peace. It solves no social problem. It merely creates new and more complicated ones. Then, Mr. Obama, speaking in his own voice, as someone who stands here as a direct consequence of Dr. King's life work, I am living testimony to the moral force of nonviolence. First of all, not that it matters that much, but I think Dr. King was referring to domestic social unrest, not international warfare. More importantly, why couldn't President Humboldt refrain from reminding us of the historical importance of the election of himself?